right, welcome to the graphing lesson. I want to run through this first part pretty quickly because there's really not a whole lot to say. So remember, what we did in the past was I gave you a function, you plugged in an x, and you got out a y value or an f of x value. Now, when you put those points together, you make, a point, and you plot that point in the coordinate plane, and you make a graph when you connect the dots. So what you're going to do today is we're going to be analyzing graphs, what to do with them. So some important parts you need to know. The first one is the x-intercept. This is where the graph will cross the x-axis. You can find that by setting y equal to 0 or f of x equal to 0. Remember, f of x and y mean the same thing. We also call these numbers zeros and roots. These are important, okay? You are going to be finding roots and zeros of functions using your graphing calculator much later. There's also the y-intercept, where the graph crosses the y-axis. You can only have one of these. You can't have a graph cross the y-axis twice. That wouldn't be a function, right? That would mean that when you plugged in x is 0, you got y equals 2 and y equals -2. That can't happen. That's not what a function is. That's not how a function works. So you can only have one y-intercept. Your graphs will never have more than one of those. Now, what we didn't discuss was the range. We talked about the domain, which was the numbers that we plug in. Remember, we found the freaks and throw them away. With the range are the numbers that come out. These are the y values. So the domain is the x values, the numbers that go in. The range is the y values that come out. Now, why didn't I talk about this before? Because you can't do it. You need a graph to do the range. Unless you have a picture to look at, it is impossible to determine the y values that come out. So the range can only be done with a graph. And since we're going to do graphs today, we will do range. Now, continuity is the last thing I want to talk about, and it is important. Continuity basically means if the graph is smooth, like a roller coaster. You go up, down, up, down. This is a graph that I just made there on the screen. That graph is continuous. It's smooth. There's no holes. There's no breaks. However, you can have holes and breaks. This is called a removable discontinuity. Whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. This is a removable discontinuity, meaning it's a hole in your roller coaster. You're going along in the roller coaster and there's a piece of the track missing. Now, how would you fix that? You would put the piece of the track there. You can just color in that dot. And once you do that, you have gotten rid of the discontinuity. All right, but that's what a discontinuity means. It's a hole or break in the graph. Now, here's another one. This one's very bad. This is called a break or split discontinuity. It's not removable. There's no way to repair this. In the first one, I can just put the piece of track that's missing in the roller coaster there. This one, if you're on the roller coaster, here's you, and you're going along, and all of a sudden, not only does the track have a hole in it, the track breaks apart and continues 10 feet above your head. Well, roller coaster and die. There's no way to fix that. So the graph is really bad when it has that type of a split. Oops. Let me fix all this here. There we go. I'm just going to undo it all. It's easier. So go with that one. There we go. So these are examples of discontinuities, removable and non-removable. Now, there's one last thing. There's something called a maximum and a minimum. You're going to do this when you start using the graphing calculator. Basically, your graph can have a high point. So if you had a parabola that's upside down, you can have a high point there. That would be a maximum y value. Or you can have a minimum. If you had a parabola that went the other way, you had the smiley face. The bottom of the bowl there is called a minimum. So these maximum and minimums are y values. The maximum is the biggest y value, and the minimum is the smallest y value. Doesn't always happen. Not every graph has that. But most of the time, there is a max or a min. Now, finding values. So this is the important thing. I'm going to give you a graph, and I'm going to ask you things. Like, for instance, I'll ask you what f of 3 is. So what you would do is you would go over to 3 on the x-axis. You go up. This one is already done because it's from the other book. You go up to the graph, and you'd see that right there is a dot. That dot goes with 2. So f of 3 would be equal to 2. You read it right off of the graph, literally. So erase all this. Now, let's say I wanted to do f of 5. Now, this is the interesting one. You're like, oh my God, okay. So you go over to 5, and you start going up and say, ooh, wait a minute, what happened here? What happened here was the graph split apart pretty badly. I was supposed to get a 1 when I plugged in 5, but I didn't. I didn't get 1. Instead, I got 2. I got the value where the dot is. The holes are discontinuities. I did not get the number 3. You can't say, oh, I got 1, 2, and 3. No, you didn't. Remember, you cannot plug in an X and get more than one Y value. You only get 1, and the one you get is right there. When I plug in X is 5, I get Y equal 2. Okay, so this is how you find the values of the graph. I'll do one more just for fun. So even though the graph split apart, and the graph splits apart very badly there. I mean, this is a huge discontinuity, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that I can't find the values. So now let's say I wanted you to do f of 7. I know I draw my 7 funky, but that's how I make it. I put the line. I would go up to the graph and I'd look and see, look at that. I have a dot there. So f of 7 would be 4. It works. So I'm able to find that value. So reading the values off the graph is pretty straightforward. I am going to do one more. I have a bunch of graphs here. I'm going to scroll down. Ooh. Okay, now I want to do f of -2. So I'm going to go to -2. Oh, man. There's a hole there. Exactly. You can't do this. So what do we write? This is a freak. You tried to plug this dude into your function, and it broke the function. You got, you had something like 1 over x plus 2. If you try to put -2 in there, you get a 0 on the bottom, right? You get that 1 over 0 dealy. How do you graph this? How do you graph 1 over 0? What the hell is this? This isn't even a number. You can't graph this. So how do you show someone who's looking at the graph that you got an undefined value? You put that big hole there. So that's what you do. Now, the question is, how would you do, say, f of -1? Okay, so here's -1. This is the point. You come up here and you say, wait a minute. There's nothing there. Of course there's something there. There's a dot that you don't see. Now, they're not going to show you that dot. But if you're looking here, I mean, you get a point. It's just not really colored in. So what do I get when I plug x is -1? I get y equals 1. It certainly looks that way to me. I mean, you can say, oh, I'm going to get 0.99, whatever. It certainly looks like when you plug -1 for x, you get y equals 1. That's how it looks to me. Stray mark. Now, more trickiness. What if you try to plug in f of 2? Okay, so here's 2. Well, I could have got -1, but I didn't. I could have got 1, but I didn't. It made a nice circle. I forgot that if I hold it, it makes a nice, pretty circle. Look, if I hold it, it understands that I'm trying to make a circle, and it actually makes a perfect circle for me. You know how hard it is to draw a perfect circle? So anyway, when I plug in x is 2, I could get y equals 1, but I didn't. I could get y equals -1, but I didn't. You didn't get anything. You got no value at all. So we call that BS, right? So those values are undefined. So now I'm going to go back and I'm going to do domain and range, but I'm going to do it on one that I drew myself by hand. I put this dot there from before. Oh, I knew that was going to happen. I have to erase this really precisely. Let's see if I can do it. That took some skill. Okay. So I want to do domain and range. I already have range written from when I did it before. I'm reshooting this lesson. Ruined. So anyway, so the domain, the big D, the domain of the x value. So we're talking about right here, right? X-axis. This is what we're looking at. So first, I want you to notice that x is -2. There's no graph out here. X is 5. There's no graph out here. I was never able to plug in 6 or 7 or 8. I just did not get graph there. There's no graph to the left of -2. There's just no graph here to the right of 5. So any number that's bigger than 5 did not get plugged in because there's no picture. And there's no graph to the left of smaller than -2 because there's no picture. So when I do the domain, so remember, you're looking at the x-axis. This is important. So what you do is you go to the first number where you see the graph, which is here, and then you just start skating. Okay, I have graph, I have graph, I have graph, I have graph. Stop. I don't see any graph past this number. So your domain is right there on the x-axis. So I got, now I have to see, did I get a number? I did. When I plugged in -2, I got -3 for y. So when x is -2, y is -3. So that means that -2 is in my domain. So I'm going to include him. Now, -1, yes. 0, yes. 1, 2, 3. All the numbers between -2 and 5 are in my domain. I have no holes and no breaks, so I have no freak. So now the question is, what about 5? Is 5 a freak or not? 5 is a freak, isn't he? Because I have a hole there. If you try to plug in x is 5, you don't get a value. So when you plug in x is 5, it's undefined. You get a BS value. So he is not in my domain. He's not part of the big D. So my domain is all numbers between -2 and 5, including -2, but not including 5. So I'm gonna erase that. Now we're gonna talk about the range. The range again is complex. If I can get rid of all this. So you do a similar thing with the range. The range of the y value, right? So you're looking at this. There's like a tunnel here on the y-axis. Where do I have y values? For instance, did I get y equals 5? You know, y equals 5 is right there. I didn't get that number, did I? No. What about y is -4? Yeah, I didn't get that either. I got the numbers here. I got y is -1. I got y is 1. I got y is 2. I got y is 3. I get all these numbers between -3 and 4. Remember, you're looking at y now, right? So y, you're looking there. So the range, now what do? We write a big R. We don't write this R. The R with the extra line means all real numbers. So the range is starting at -3. I do get y equals -3. You see, I circled it. It's right there. I got that dot. So it's included. Now, I got all the numbers between -3 and 4. The question is, did I get 4? Well, no, I didn't get 4. I did not get y equals 4. I was supposed to. When I plug in x is 5, I was supposed to get y equals 4. I just didn't. So my range is all the numbers, y values. Remember, y values. It's all the y values between -3 and 4. I got them all, except for 4. I never got a y value bigger than 4. And I never got a y value smaller than -3 because there's no graph there. And there's no graph there. So that's how to do the range. Now I'm going to go back to the other one. And I'm going to do the domain D. First I'm going to do the domain of big D. So same thing. Make yourself a tunnel this way. Right? You're looking at the x-axis. There's the x-axis. I'm looking here. Look, no graph, no graph. You do not have graph to the left of 2. You do not have graph to the right of 7. Your graph is cut off here, right? You don't have any graph there. You don't have any graph there. So where do I see that I had numbers that work? Only here in the middle. Now I got to worry about that. So I get 2, and I get 7. So I'm writing 2 to 7. Why? Because that's where my graph is, right? From here to here. From here to here. My tunnel. There's my tunnel. Now, worry about here. Is 5 a freak? Well, when I plugged 5 in, I got 2. So 5 is not a freak, so I don't have to throw him away. So my domain here, was I able to plug in 2? Yes, I was. So he's included. Was I able to plug in 7? Yes, I was. So he's included. So that's my domain. Plug those numbers in. So my domain is all the x's between 2 and 7, and it works. Right, so now the range, again, let me make the erase it. Range, a big R. So again, this time you got to make the tunnel this way. Why am I making the tunnel there? So you can see that there's graph there. The graph, go to the y-axis and make it a graph. So there's graph. I get y equals, maybe I don't get y equals 1 and 4. So this is where you write those numbers down. So you write 1 and you write 4. And then you ask yourself, did I get that y value? Did I get y equals 1? Yeah, I didn't. So 1 is not included in my range of y values. Did I get y equals 4? Yeah. When I plugged in x is 7, I got y is 4. The dot is right there. So I did get 4. So my range is all of the numbers between 1 and 4, not including 1, but including 4. You got all these numbers. I got 3, I got 2, I got 3.2, 3.5, 4, 3.9, 1.6. I got all of the numbers between 1 and 4 in my range. Those are the y values that came out of the function. Now we'll do the last one. So again, I'm going to do the big D first, the domain. So this one's more complicated. So let's see, again, I'll try to make my little tunnel here. I see graph here, here, okay. So I see graph here. Let me erase the ends now. So what you do is you write the endpoints down, -2. Now, you have to worry about 0. So I'm going to put 0, and I'm going to put 3. These are all the 2 also. These are all the points where weird stuff happens, like here at 2. Weird stuff happens there, and weird stuff happens there. So you gotta start putting it all together. So from -2 to 0, I didn't get -2. -2 is not in my domain. He's a freak. How about 0? What happened when I plugged in 0? Nothing happened. You got 2 holes. So 0 is the freak. So I have to remove him. So you got to put the U. Now, once you got past 0, I was able to plug in a half, a third, a fourth, 0.99. I was able to plug in 1. I was able to plug in numbers all the way until I got to 2. So 2 is another freak. You see? Hole, hole. So 2 didn't work. And then union all the way up to 3. So then from 2 to 3. I was able to plug in all those numbers there until I got to 3. So look at this domain. I was able to plug in numbers between -2 and 0. And I did. Look, I have a graph there. I was not able to plug in -2 and I was not able to plug in 0. I was able to plug in all the numbers between 0 and 2. And then I was able to plug in the numbers between 2 and 3. But -2 is a freak, 0 is a freak, 2 is a freak, and 3 is a freak. You have a lot of freaks there. So that screwed up my function pretty badly. I have I completely destroyed the graph. Now the range, big R, is going to be the last one. And again, I know it's tricky. You got to practice this a lot. It's tough. So for the range, you make the tunnel going this way, and you look. Now you got to be real careful here. I have no graph here, none at all. So what I got was, I definitely got y. Look, if you take x equal 1, you get y equals -1. Don't believe me? Right there. Okay, so I definitely get the y value of -1, but I don't get any more. I don't have any other y values there in the middle. They're just not there. So it's going to pick up then over here. I do, well, I don't get 0, right? I almost get 0, but I don't get 0. I don't get y equals 0. I do get y equals 1. It's right here. I do get y equals 1. There's a dot at the top of the hill there. So I do get 1 for y. And I do get all the numbers in the middle. Look, I get y equals a half. I get y equals 0.6. I get y equals 0.9. I get y equals 0.2. I do get those other y values. So I do get all the y values between 0 and 1. I just don't get 0. And I don't get any y values. I get no y values between -1 and 0. I do get -1. So those are the y values that I get. So that's my range. Okay, so that was the domain and the range.